Kean. It's terrific to see you again. I don't know, how long is it since we met? 20, 30 years, something like that?
I think it's 28 years ago.
20, it's longer than I actually thought, because the amazing thing is, and I keep telling people this, that we first met in a bar in Iowa.
Yes.
And I have to say, what actually was the reason for us being there. And of course, you were working senior manager with ICI at the time, ICI Explosives, or Nobel's Explosives, out in the States out there.
Yes.
Yeah. One of the things I interacted with, and we talked about it a lot recently, was that incident where the chap Byron, the chief engineer, almost blew himself up. Fortunately, he was a very lucky guy to get away with it. What about the reasons behind that? Can you remember what we discussed?
Yeah, I think there's a number of obviously reasons. One of the things about that project was it was changed from where it was going to be.
Yeah, yeah.
And consequently, equipment was reused,
right,
and redesigned, and probably not adequately. Also, the staff were not necessarily used to making igniters of this sort, and there was some cultural issues with some of the individuals. There was also time pressures because the project was behind schedule, and so this issue of it keep breaking down. Then people were trying to get it fixed quickly. So there was a whole set of sort of things that came together.
Yeah, because the chap who actually had the incident, you could say, well, it was all his fault, and it certainly was. And we don't usually, finger people with blame, but he'd done something incredibly stupid. Yes. Unlucky to be alive. But it's interesting, we talked about it, the whole background. I know we talk about root cause, but in fact, it's much wider than that. It was the fact you'd moved to that location. You're using people you hadn't used before. The other thing is, it was a very, very technical thing. It almost had gone too far in terms of technology, isn't that right?
Yes, that's correct. It was very sophisticated, and they were the throughput was that they were looking for was probably over too much for the equipment that was going to be reused, and so the rest of the plant was way overcomplicated, and so everything was backing up because things were breaking down all the time.
Because you had no buffer in that.
That's right.
And it always reminded me of if you like train sets, it was a wonderful train set, all these little things travelling along, but there was no buffer there.
No, and that's what caused some of the issues, well, a lot of the issues with this piece of equipment and the operation of it was the fact that, once it's further down the line, things stopped and everything else backed up. And so you couldn't store anything inside the process.
But of course, storage also is a problem, and what the chap was doing was a problem, because we have to remember we're actually working with live explosives.
Yes.
And if it goes wrong, you don't go home at night.
Yeah, and he was very lucky.
He said that himself.
Yeah. And he should have known better in many ways.
He did know better, he just didn't do it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. After we spent quite a long time in America, but you went on from there to work in northeast of England, didn't you? Working in a chemical plant. I think you had an incident there that you had investigated. Yes,
because what was interesting when I went to that Fine Organics plant is that it's the first time we brought Topset in to do a load of training.
I remember that, yeah.
And so it was there was quite a lot of us trained. And a sort of 2-day special sort of tailored...
Thank you very much, by the way.
It was a tailored event, really. But what happened was we had a really quite serious explosion. Well, not exactly an explosion, but a reaction that took place in a tanker.
Right.
And in many ways it was an overpressurization, and we had stuff spewing out the top of this very large tanker.
Right.
Now, what had changed was that, and it's an important fact, was that the client, which was a big multinational client, had asked us to actually change the way in which we transported the product. It had been transported as a neat product in drums, but they wanted to actually try and export it and it was going across to the continent. So God knows what happened if this happened on a boat. But they wanted to actually transport it in the solvent that was used in the first stage of the process.
All right.
So it eliminated them handling the raw product in their factory. So this was a change. Now they said, and they analysed done lots of testing to make sure it was stable, but something happened, and we're never quite sure what actually happened to actually make it go unstable. So the solvent, which had chlorine in it, reacted and went up caused overpressure, and then you had hydrogen chloride gas going up through with steam going up through the safety valve.
Sure.
So it was that change, and we used topset, completely to do the investigation as a process, and it worked very well. But we found it very difficult with all the testing to actually find what was the initiator of that decomposition. But what the result was, we had to go back to the old way of doing it.
What's interesting there, Ian, and it's really is a theme of everything we do is change.
Yeah.
And I've looked at well over 100 incidents, and you and I have done quite a lot together in various industries. And you can't really have an incident or an accident without change. Something has changed, and it's finding out what that is. And clearly that was the case at your northeast of England plant.
Oh yes, there'd been the process initially was to pack this into sort of thick liquid, but pack it into drums and ship it off that way. And we knew that was stable because it was a neat component. But when we put it into the solvent, the client had said, "Oh, we've done all the tests under the sun to actually make sure it's stable." But there was something happened, and that could have been just a catalytic reaction, something a contaminant inside the tanker, because you can never be sure that it's completely clean.
Yeah.
And so with all the work that we did, and obviously we realised that the change was the fundamental root cause, that we had to go back to what we did before.
Yes, change, and that leads into loss of control and so on. That's interesting because we've worked together in so many industries. The next one where we worked on were railways. And I think the first really big railway investigation that we did was working with my colleague Jackie, was a derailment at Hammersmith. And behind that, again, where it was a rail broke, so there was your change, right away. But what was the background? Can you remember the background to why the rail broke?
Well, one of the reasons that there was issues with maintenance in that part of, that whole line, in terms of recording things. One of the issues was the fact that it was difficult to detect these cracks when initiated.
Sure.
One of the reasons why it sprung the way it did was because it was turned round.
Yes, I remember that was to reuse the rail. Was that right?
Reuse the rail so that it was turned round, so that the wear that had taken place on one side was now on the other side, and then you got rail that wasn't worn on the other side again. So that meant that it got tension in the rail itself. So when it broke, it
snapped and separated.
Yeah, and that meant that there was a nice little jagged edge, if you like, that brought the train off.
Yeah, we were very lucky because I think it was the last car that came off.
Yes.
And it was in the evening, and although it was Piccadilly line, it wasn't that busy at the time because it could have been, very much worse.
Yeah, again, it's one of those things. The consequences could have been a multi-vehicle incident, a multi-train incident with one coming the other way hitting that train.
Absolutely, very, very lucky. Yeah. And again, there's the change coming in there again. Let's move on to a real tragedy, and let's talk about the one at Elsingham.
Yeah, this is one of the first things I investigated, or had. It was quite an interesting one because it had been investigated, and the organisation that I took over, the HMRI, had closed the investigation. RABE had done an investigation, Rail Accident Investigation Branch had done an investigation. But what was interesting was that even their investigation didn't get to some of the root causes.
But maybe just before we go into that, I would just say, for people watching us, what it was two young girls, teenagers, who crossed a railway track and were both sadly hit by the train. That was, and it was in the national press at the time.
Oh yes, and when I reopened it, it got even more press. Yeah. Because what happened was that Elsinham's an interesting station. It's got two platforms, but they're not aligned. They're adjacent to each other.
Sure.
So you've got in the middle, you've got the crossing.
Right.
So you've got one platform on the one side and the other one on the other side.
Yeah.
So they saw their train on the platform that they thought they were going to catch.
Yeah.
Go to Cambridge.
Yeah.
They had to cross the line to actually this is the really interesting point, to get their tickets. If a ticket machine had been on the other platform, as was then put in place on both platforms, they would never had to cross the line.
So it was really unintended consequences of having the ticket machine in the wrong place.
Yeah, well, not having a ticket machine on both sides.
Yeah.
And when the ticket office had been withdrawn, of course, so no one had thought through, although the near misses had happened numerous times, the same sort of situation where they were crossed over, get their ticket and then cross back again to get their train. So they saw their train in the platform thinking that, yes, there was red lights on the warning lights, but they thought that was due to their train that they could see.
Yes.
Unfortunately, there was a train coming in the opposite direction, which they didn't see, which knocked them over and killed them. Very tragic. But that's people not thinking through the human factors of that situation, and also not having thought through and completed actions from, because this has been proposed before, to put this extra ticket machine on the platform, not following actions from risk assessments and near misses.
I'm glad you brought up the human factors there, because human factors, or human elements as I quite like to call them, they're behind absolutely everything. And of course people often look at it and say, well, the person did something wrong, so it was their fault. Maybe the girls in this case. But in fact, when we look at it, it's everything about, as you indicated, design of the setup, design of where the platforms were, design of where the ticket machine was. So it really goes back. So if we look at root cause analysis, they go back a long way, and people are involved at every single stage.
Yes, and that's why they ended up, Network Rail, being prosecuted, because they had prior knowledge that this was an issue, and they'd not really thought through all the issues of when they made some of the changes. Because there had been whether do you lock the gates or not, and some people thought that locking the gates was more dangerous because they could get stuck in the middle and couldn't get out.
Sure.
So it's a case of not understanding that they thought, and these are young, and the other thing was this station was used by a lot of young teenage people.
Sure.
They thought that they didn't do that deliberately. They thought their train on the other side was the one that was resulted in the red light. So they made an assumption that was the train that would cause the red light on the miniature warning lights for the crossing, where there was another train coming on the opposite direction, which was difficult for them to see as well.
That takes us on to, human elements, risk assessment. We talk quite a lot about risk. Tell me a bit about, how you see risk assessment. How do we evaluate risk? Something I looked at last night, and risk's often very poorly defined. And I was reading a book last night and said risk is anything you want it to be. I actually disagree with that, but let me have your view.
Well, you've got to go back to the hazards, haven't you?
Sure.
And, a level crossing is extremely hazardous, for example.
Sure.
And the risks are, of fatalities, being hit by a train. It's where you've got people interacting with a moving vehicle that can't stop very quickly at all. So it's important to actually try and have a broad view of what the risks are, but make sure you've done your hazard analysis effectively. And then also one of the things I've found in some parts of some sectors is they don't learn from near misses, or what we used to call in the internet near hits, where you can do a risk assessment, and a good example is that I know quite well is the Channel Tunnel, where there'd been a major risk assessment done about how frequent a fire might occur, but very soon fires occurred that were much more frequent than they thought they were going to be. So it's important to actually re-evaluate risks on the basis of knowledge, and not just assume you've got it right first time.
Because risk is almost imagining the unimaginable.
Yeah, and that's trying to think, and you might not get it right completely first time.
Sure.
But you are trying to brainstorm or imagine it with a team what those risks are. But you have to re-evaluate on an ongoing basis, because they can change, and they can change because of change, but they also can change because you learn more about the situation that you're involved with.
Yeah, what I was interested in there, you brought up the word hazard. And a lot of people really don't understand risk and hazard. And my view is that a risk is exposing yourself to the hazard. So it's not a general thing. So for example, the sea's a hazard, but it only becomes a risk when you sail in it. It's fine if you leave it alone. And that's true of many things.
Yeah.
So also in the railway situation, where you've probably got maybe most of your life's experience in railway, although you've worked in explosives and you've worked in chemicals, but in fact it is that exposure to the hazard where the risk is.
And that's particularly particular issue in railways, because unlike we were able to control risks more effectively in an enclosed chemical plant.
Sure.
Because we knew what the hazards were, and that's why we always were trying on the track worker side to eliminate people being exposed to the risk, to the hazard.
Sure.
The hazard to a track worker is being hit by a train when he's working. We spent a lot of effort to get the industry to move away from having them work within traffic.
Sure.
So if you try and remove people from the risk, because that's the hierarchy, it's either engineering control or to actually remove people from the hazard itself.
That sort of leads me on to another thing, not to do with railways. Quite some time ago, we had a person on one of our top set courses, and this was a road engineering company, and they'd had a road worker killed by a bus. And this man said to us, director of his company, I will never do another repair job on the road unless the road is closed. And it's interesting, you see that nowadays, that to avoid people being exposed to the hazard, they close the road.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things I've forced in my last few years in my last role was to get the industry to do less work, or nearly all their work, in planned closures.
Yes.
Because that's much more safer, but it's also much more efficient.
Yeah.
Having people hopping off on and off the track is not very efficient and productive at all.
No.
And you're exposing them to hazard all the time and risk. So, the hazard of being hit by the train. So it's really important to actually do as you say, make sure that you do eliminate some of that risk from the beginning.
Coming on to, almost finishing our conversation in a sense, I know we talked about, maybe writing a book, and the theme would be what's the causes of industrial accidents and how do we prevent them. So I think we've covered that to some extent. The first thing is change is a big one. The failure to do risk assessment. And those really are probably the two biggest things in anything we'll be looking at. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. And I think there's a third one, which is failing to learn.
I agree with you. It's interesting, if we go back, there's a chap called, a German guy called Ebbinghaus, goes back to about 1870, and he came up with something called the forgetting curve. So people, in fact, actually forget things have been, and I saw it a lot with that big explosives company we're very familiar with.
Yes.
That people had actually retired and no one knew how to handle the chemicals, and they had to bring the people back again so they could safely close the plant down.
Yeah, and I find it very disappointing that we got things like the Grenville Public Inquiry, which is really, is coming up with the same issues that have in previous public inquiries in different sectors.
Yeah, I mean, that bothered me a lot. I mean, so many times I've gone back and said, I don't really want to do this. I've done it before. It's a 42, it's a 63, whatever, in terms of the incident. Everyone's different to some extent, but it is that learning curve's a problem.
Yeah, and people do forget, and that's why it's so important. As we kept saying in the rail industry, never forget, the lessons of Ladbroke Grove, Hatfield, Potters Bar, all those tragic incidents. And same with the level crossings as well.
Yeah.
And at least we now got, and I hope they do keep remembering, because one of the things we did with level crossings was make somebody accountable for the risk of level crossing, because it was dispersed.
Yeah.
But it's really important to remember that benefit of having one person accountable for management of the risk at their particular level crossings.
Yeah, I think accountability is very important. So really, to summarise, where we've been with this discussion is we're agreed that change is a major issue, the failure to do risk assessment, and then when we have done this, people have forgotten about it, and they forget that these were the things that caused it, so they don't necessarily change their behaviour.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks very much, Ian.
Thanks, David.